Well, finally, Mr. Bassen has been connected with us. Professor Bassen, welcome to our event. Thank you very much for being here, for joining us tonight. It is quite challenging to introduce you to our audience, since we all know your extremely high role in the sector of sustainable finance in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Alexander Bassen. Mr. Bassen, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation and for this very warm words at the beginning. I'm very happy to be here today because, as you might know, Priscilla and myself, we're working together for a couple of years already, because I had the pleasure to be member of the German Sustainability Council. And during my membership, we also developed the Sustainability Code. And Greece was always one of those leading countries who implemented the Sustainability Code from the beginning. So you have a lot of experience there. So therefore, it's a great honor for me to be here tonight and to share some of the ideas, some of my opinions of what is happening right now in terms of sustainability reporting. Unfortunately, I do not speak Greek, but I understood that you talked about the taxonomy already. So we can just skip that part. But I think it's important to have an idea of the general landscape of what is happening right now, because there are so many different activities going on. And therefore, I think, and it's very important to understand how these different activities are aligned, how they are linked. And this is what I would like to talk to you about, especially in terms of the reporting requirement for different types of companies, for small and medium-sized enterprises, but also for large companies. As you might be aware of, that there is a new regulation. The first regulation we looked at for sustainability reporting was the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. That's what you did for capital market participants. When we look at corporates, we had the Non-Financial Reporting Directive on the European Union level, which addressed more or less companies that are listed on the stock exchange and bank and insurance companies, so public interest entities, and they had to report about their non-financial activities. And you know that last year, the Commission, especially DG FISMA, published the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, with some major differences compared to what we do have to report until now already from a corporate perspective. So what are the differences? It's not only the name, so it's not non-financial reporting anymore. Now it's corporate sustainability reporting. But there are other features that changed. For example, the scope of this reporting directive. So I said before, the former directive had covered approximately 11,000 companies in Europe. The new directive will cover approximately 50,000 companies in Europe. So that's a major difference. Why is the scope that large? Because now it says that every large company has to report based on the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And large companies in the European definition means more than 250 employees and some balance sheet and asset characteristic, but especially important is these 250 employees. And the former requirement to be listed on a stock exchange does not exist anymore. So therefore, we are talking about companies with more than 250 employees. You might know the number of companies that are covered by this directive in Greece. For the structure we do have in Germany, we have right now approximately 600 companies who have to report mandatory about their non-financial reporting. And we will have from the 600 up to 15,000 companies. So a massive change in the scope of this mandatory sustainability reporting. In addition, the sustainability information needs to be disclosed in the management report of the reporting, plus an external auditing is mandatory as well. And thirdly, and this is what I would like to talk about, is that there will also be, for the first time, a mandatory sustainability reporting standard, a Europe-wide mandatory sustainability reporting standard. And EFRAG, the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, is now producing this mandatory reporting standard. I have the pleasure and the honor to be a member of the project task force of EFRAG, where we are developing right now this mandatory reporting standard. I would just like to give you a brief insight of the process, the next steps, and what we already published. So the working group is what I just said. It's linked to EFRAG. Just to give you a feeling of how much work that is, we have 2 to 3 meetings a week, 2 to 3 hours, plus approximately every 2 hours, every 2 weeks, a plenary session with all the members. We clustered our work. So we have 9 different clusters for different topics. So we have a cluster for E, for S and for G, one for climate, one for small and medium-sized enterprises, and also one for, we call it cross-cutting standards. So these are reporting requirements that are relevant for all the other standards. For example, about governance, about materiality, but also about questions of reporting boundaries, a very critical point. So how, which part of the value chain should be integrated into the reporting of the companies. So this is the general setup we do have there. The EFRAG task force is chaired by Patrick Ducombourg. He's from France, and he has a really tough job because we started our work last summer, and the whole draft of the EFRAG European Sustainability Reporting Standard should pass the Parliament this October. So it will become, and that's the plan, not quite sure if that will work out, but the plan is that for the reporting year 2022, in 2023, all the companies I mentioned before should report based on this reporting standard. So, and I just want to give you one idea of what we did there. I'm in charge of the cross-cutting standard on governance and organization, and the reporting requirement, and it's a reporting, a disclosure requirement, not a performance requirement. The reporting requirement is that the companies should, for example, explain how the governance board is in charge on and informed about sustainability aspects, what they discussed, and also question of if it's integrated into the remuneration. Until now, there are only working papers published. So EFRAG published 5 different working papers of the different standards. And the most advanced standard so far is the climate standard. So therefore, if you would like to dig a little bit deeper, it makes absolutely sense to read the working paper drafts we do have so far that are published until now. Just one final comment on, is there a conflict between this new European standard and other existing standards? You know that also the IFRS Foundation founded the the ISSB, which is something like the sustainability board of the IFRS Foundation. So it's not only the IFRS, it's also the ISSB now, and they are developing a global standard. And this is a very important step because yes, it will be mandatory in Europe, but from an investor's perspective, it makes sense to have a global comparable standard. That's why the work of the ISSB is so important and will be so important. So there should be an alignment between the EFRAG reporting and the ISSB reporting. That's for sure. I mean, for all the stakeholders, for companies, but also for investors, This makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, we have the GRI as a reporting standard, and GRI is a co-constructor of the EFAS, the European standard. So there we do see an alignment. And last word, when you are right now using the sustainability code in Greece, your question might be, well, does it make sense to use this standard anymore? Therefore, I would like to draw your attention to something the Sustainability Council did last week. They adopted the code also to the taxonomy. So that means when you're using the sustainability code right now, you can also fulfill the requirements, so CapEx, OpEx revenues for your activities for the taxonomy. So this is a very important step, and something similar will happen to the CSRD. So therefore, we do see this tendency of alignment of the different standards, and I'm very positive that this will not be an extra burden, but the general idea of transparency to increase the performance, the sustainability performance of companies is something we will definitely achieve. So thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to answer at least some questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Bassen. Actually, we have the chance to hear from you what now is happening on this very important front regarding the sustainability trends. Please stay with us because since Mrs. Haroula Palagaki, Secretary General of the Hellenic Banking Association, and Mrs. Anastasia Stamou, Vice President of the Hellenic Capital Market Commission, would like to interact with you. Please, we don't have much time, unfortunately, but I think that the questions would be very useful and to the point. Please. Ms. Palagaki. First
I was muted. Apologies. Professor Bassen, good evening. Well, I see that your speech and your presentation is based, of course, in the three principles I see in your background: research, teaching, and education. Well, that's the principles that govern also our behavior in the code. Well, I have two questions, and I would like to start with a remark rather. Well, we see there is a tendency for over-regulation. This very extended and mandatory reporting, it's not sufficient that the substance is there in the business model. The enterprises are requested to prove and to provide permanent proof that and to disclosure also their business model. Do you have some concerns on it? Well, the experience is that over-regulations lifts the regulation and the effectiveness. That would be my first question. My second question, more or less in Europe, the mainstream of the business activity is carried by the medium or the small companies. In Greece, we have some additional characteristics, but nevertheless, following the public statements of the European bodies, the 80% of the European companies are rather medium and small companies. Shall they succeed to afford such a mandatory task? Because they need a lot of experts, a lot of assistance. For instance, to deliver to you an example, I have recently seen the report of a Greek big listed company. The previous one amounted 120 pages and the new one, 320. You see any burden or any risks? That would be my two questions to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. These are two very very important question, I think. Let me start with the second question regarding the SMEs, the small and medium-sized enterprises. The EU definition for the CSRD is that it's for large companies, more than 250 employees. So I think we all agree that if you think about companies with 250 employees, they are not by nature large for our understanding. But talking about the companies you just meant, that means SMEs, that means less than 250 employees. Therefore, EFRAG develops a separate standard with much smaller requirements for those companies. But I think it's important to differentiate between those companies that have a high impact, for example, environmental impact, if you think about the concrete industry, for example, or oil and gas companies, smaller. I think we all agree that the requirements for them should be higher compared to SMEs who are just, for example, let's say trading companies. So I think it's very important to differentiate there. The first question was about overregulation. I think we have to be extremely careful in terms of regulational measures, because we do see a lot of companies who have a positive understanding of sustainability, would like to support that. And an overregulation would go in a different direction. So the idea of the CSRD is also, it's not a performance standard, it's a disclosure standard. That means if companies have something to disclose, they should do that. If they don't have anything to disclose, they can just explain that there isn't. So we know this comply or explain mechanism. But I think I totally agree that we have to be extremely careful in that field and to give especially those companies more time and to focus on those that have a very high impact, a very high exposure to environmental or social risks.
If I may, you say, I think that proportionality, or like the German say, Verhältnismäßigkeit, for the small companies shall be very relevant in this direction too. And taking also into account the nature of the activity. If you are in the energy, you have other standards, but I do agree. And if I may, just last, you are considered to be father or one of the father for the sustainability code. So far, I think that the sustainability code shall be sustainable for a longer time, because it offers some more elements which exceed the nature of the mandatory framework. How can the sustainability code be useful and supportive for the companies in the new environment?
Yeah, also this is an important question, and you're right. I had the pleasure to develop the code. I think it was in 2011. So I have very close, let's say, emotional relation to the code. But,
yes, of course.
I think that the code has different advantages. First, it's also very good applicable for smaller companies, because we only have this 20 criteria there. Everything is explained. You can use KPIs that are established, so you know all the advantages already. But it should also be a step for small and medium-sized enterprises when they become larger to enter into the mandatory reporting regime. That's why the council, the Sustainability Council, added a taxonomy tool where you can also report based on the taxonomy, and they will do something similar for the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Okay. So that the code still exists and is something like a platform to integrate all the different potentially mandatory requirements in the future, but is still applicable for small and medium-sized enterprises.
That's why I wanted to highlight and to become evident that the code shall be always useful, supportive, and supportive for the companies this time. And it has been also a kind of pioneer in this direction. Thank you very much, Professor Bassen.
Thanks for your questions.
Well, I think we concluded on this.
Mrs. Tamo.
Yes, Ms. Tamo has to.
Yes. Words by saying that we can say that soft law, like the code, is also a mean for developing the culture, which is the connecting part between overregulation and soft law. And I would like to pose another question. I think the last one for this section of today's event. And we are talking about disclosure of non-financial information. However, this information has financial impact, or may have, if it's material. So do you see any danger for companies that disclose too much information, or are very eager to disclose information, or to disclose it in a nice or a nicer way? Do you think any danger for market abuse in this respect?
Yeah, also this is a very good comment and also question. Yes, I mean, it's still framed as non-financial, but the new regulation will call it sustainable information. So that does make exactly the difference you pointed out. This danger of greenwashing is something we definitely have to take into account. There is, of course, such a risk, but the more transparency we do have, if you can compare within industries, that makes it much easier. And the idea is also that the companies explain what the relation between the sustainability information and the financial information is. So what is the relation between these two different parties? This is something what we are doing in empirical academic research to find out what is the relation between sustainability performance and financial performance. And this is also the idea. But I think your question goes also in the direction, might it be a competitive disadvantage for the companies if they have to disclose in Europe differently compared to other parts of the world? Therefore, I think the initiative of the ISSB is so extremely important to have a global sustainability standard. And I think you are aware that the ISSB from the IFRS Foundation also integrated SASB and the IRRC, the Value Reporting Foundation. So therefore, I think this is also something where we will have, probably not this year, but in the near future, a global standard, and then this competitive aspect will become less important.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, Professor Bassen, ladies, thank you very indeed for joining us to this extremely useful and informative as well panel. Thank you again, Mr. Bassen.